Thank you so much for coming to the talk. And I'm going to share about my current PhD research looking at how can we successfully communicate private land conservation. And Kelly Fielding is my primary supervisor, and she is an environmental psychologist in University of Queensland. And my associate supervisor is Jonathan Rhodes, and he's a quantitative decision scientist, I call him. So I started my PhD back to 2022, and this is my final year. And my PhD is a part of the ARC linkage program with the Biodiversity Conservation Trust. And this this project looking at how can we better protect koalas on private lands, especially under the uncertainty of climate events. For example, a lot of other members in my team, they're doing some fancy stuff. They're looking at in 2050, so where we should protect better for koalas. But for my PhD, I'm looking into the social components to looking at how can we engage landholders better to get them on board. The reason is because majority of the koalas are found on someone's backyard. And private land is also home to more than 50% of the threatened species in Australia, and also 70 to 90% of the puli or non-protected biodiversity. So they are very important. And as you all know, there are many different types of agreements to engage landholders to protect biodiversity, such as land for wildlife. Yeah, but for my PhD, I really interested in looking into the conservation covenants. So this is the legal binding agreement attached to the land title. So because it's legally enforceable, so the conservation covenants are the ways to make sure our conservation investments can be secured in long time. So it's part of the privately protected areas. But this is someone's land. So it's up to landholders to decide whether they want to adopt this agreement or not. And adoptions can be affected by many reasons. For example, the economic status, the conservation values, the lifestyle, and other social reasons. So the communication is very important. And we are now at a very critical point of time because we need to achieve the global biodiversity framework, the 30 by 30 targets in 2030. So, wow, it's only 5 years away, right? So we need to have additional lands under protection to make sure the 30% of the global land are under protections. And in Australia, we also commit to that goal. So we need to secure additional 60 million hectares of land to be protected areas. So which include about 40 million of private lands. But it's very promising. The Nature Policy Plan, since we have a very good government commitment, and we may have more opportunities to attract private sectors to invest in private land. But how can we secure this opportunity to get more people on board? Because it's also up to landholder decisions for us to achieve this goal. So the communication could be the first step, right, to get people interested and get people on board. But interesting, so little research really looking into the communication about the long-term, the bonding agreements. So in Australia, only found like one study. They were looking into how these private land conservations are framing their benefits on website. But I have to point out that the studies not only looking into conservation covenants, but they look at a broader like non-bonding agreements as well. So there's no study really looking into these bonding agreements. And I only found another one study in the US looking at so what type of communication channels landholders prefer for the conservation easement, like a similar mechanism for covenants, but they call it differently in the US. But I have to highlight that communication is a holistic process, right? It's not only one message. It's not only like a one type of channels. It's a process. For example, what is your clear communication goal? So do you want to raise people's awareness, or you want to change specific behavior? So in our case, we want to encourage people to adopt conservation agreements, right? And who are the target audience? Like someone who sign up for non-bonding agreements could be different from the ones like join this covenanting programs, because it involves high-level commitments and the long-term commitments. And what's content and who is going to disseminate this message? and what type of channels may work best, and how we're going to evaluate this process. So, but nothing really looking into the strategic communication. So, which is the purposeful use of communication resources by the organizations to fulfill its mission. And the reason why I mention this concept, because strategic communication is really relevant when organizations are facing, for example, limited resourcing, uncertainty, we don't know what will happen, or significant challenges such as environmental crisis. This sounds very familiar, right? So, like, I think in conservation world, the organizations are commonly facing the short of resources, and we need to take urgent actions now to address the biodiversity crisis. This means we need to really strategically and systematically manage our existing limited resources to achieve our communication goal. However, although strategic communication has been like successfully used in other domains like public health, business marketing, or political campaigns, or environmental sustainability issues, but this concept has not been well used to communicate important biodiversity conservation issues. So this is why my research coming and aim to answer two questions. First, see how the conservation covenanting programs are communicated now in Australia, and can we make the communication better? Can we make the communication more strategic to better use the limited resourcing to achieve our goal? So here's the one to sort of give you backgrounds. There are two main type of communication. So one is called transmission model, sort of one-way process. Like I, as a sender, I design the message and send to the receiver. For example, commonly seeing a informational campaign, or for example, Yana write an article, right, to release it, or advertising, or website, or social media, so like one way. But another important model we call interactive two-way process. So it's like communication is not only I tell you something, but I receive feedback from my audience. So this is a two-way process involving relation building or negotiating, right? Like covenant is a negotiating process to talking about benefits, but also costs, and how we allocate resources to solve the potential conflicts. It's a two-way. So for my PhDs, I'm looking at the two models. To reflect on that, for the one-way process, I'm looking at how the different organizations are communicating on their website. So this is the one-way process, and how the international communications are happening. So between landholders and other stakeholders, for example, the biodiversity officers who are steering these programs. So for the one-way process, I analyzing all the websites. So that's presenting or communicating the covenanting programs. But to understand why these the websites are constructed in a certain way, I interviewed 6 organizations, the communication officers, so who design the content, to ask them, well, what strategies did you use? So why you want to do that in a certain way? And also to get the different understanding about whether landholders are using this website and do they find the website useful. I interviewed 31 about them to talk about their experiences. And for the interpersonal communication, so I interviewed 19 biodiversity officers from New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, and Tasmania to understand what are the key drivers to underpinning this trusted relationship to make the communication sort of working. I'm going to share that with you in details now. So first, which other programs are offered in Australia about the conservation covenants? So we identified 17 in total. So 8 programs are offered at the state level. For example, in New South Wales, the Biodiversity Conservation Trust, they are administrating the conservation agreement. And we also identified 9 programs that offered at the council level, the local governments, but only funding Southeast Queensland. So these 9 councils, they offer the covenants, so which are looking at could be smaller habitats, like 1 hectares. But interesting, so the council officers told me that, so their covenants are not contributing to 30 by 30. This is sort of like a very big structural barriers. And And for my website communication, I first analyzing, so what communication strategies are presenting there? And for example, do they have landholder stories? Are they using the positive framing to say, oh, conservation covenants is a good way to protect biodiversity? Or for example, loss framing, talking about conservation covenants can help you to prevent the land clearing. So the different ways of communication. And not only the text, I also analyzed what sort of visual are they using, right? So what type of images? Are they the presence of beautiful nature, like old girls trees, like native wildlife, or for example, the threats to nature, like the weeds, or like land clearing or grazing? And do they present the data, we call normative data, to showing land covenanting the popular? So for example, this is the biotrust for nature. They present data showing already 1,567 people covenanted. So you're not alone. Or do anybody really communicating the process? I think only South Australia on their website talking about if you want to adopt a heritage agreement, this is the process you need to follow. And then we ask communication officers what the functions, what the role of the website in your mind. And all of them mention the website is not a marketing tool. They don't rely on the websites to attract like new applicants, but instead the website is more a supporting tool to give people additional information or supplementary information. For example, for natural refuge programs, they only update the website if they got a like grant release. And the officers all mentioned that they spend less than 10% of the time updating information because they don't think website is important. What are the reasons? And according to our thematic analysis, we found resourcing is a key reason to decide how the websites were constructed. For example, in organizations where private land conservation is only a small part of that job, like the councils, right? Councils, they need to deal with road or education or people's complaint. So private land conservation teams are very small. So some councils, they only have one officer. So they don't have any dedicated communication officer, but instead, this only biodiversity officer is the one put up all the content and just ask the communication teams, okay, put it on our website, that's it. So they don't have any communication background. And they make the content very simple and dry and interesting. Some officers said they intend to make the website boring because they are the one delivering the program. So they know how much workload on them. So they don't want to make the website attractive to get more people because it will just create more false expectation to get more people they cannot serve. So they only have very basic information such as grant updates or eligibility, right? But because the main function is to serve existing landholders, they don't have capacity to handle anybody more. But in organizations where private land conservation is the major target, such as biodiversity conservation trusts or trusts for nature. So they got a more sort of comprehensive or beautiful, appealing website. So in these organizations, they normally have the dedicated communication officer, but only one. So you are also doing a lot of other jobs, like Yana, right? You are writing articles, you are doing the marketing, and you are managing the website. So they sort of come from backgrounds like journalism or communication, so have more sort of experiences. So they using more like a visual, and they work with the biodiversity office together to co-design the content to make it appeal to the audience. And they have a more rich content because they want to make the website not only communicating the covenants, but more sort of the good story to get people know more about nature, to care about nature. Because like Trust for Nature, they also rely on the donations, right? So it's not only serving landholders, but they want to attract potential donors, and they want to attract more public to care about the work they're doing. But still, these old officers, they mentioned, well, the biggest barrier is that we don't have money, we don't have resourcing, so we don't have people. So the reason we only have a small amount of time to doing the websites. But anyway, I don't think websites are important. But how about the landholders? Do they use the website? Do they think the website are important? So out of the 31 landholders, the majority of them used or partially used the website. And many of them said, oh, I actually found the website useful because sort of reinforce the idea to covenant, right? To say, so the websites are perceived very useful, especially at the beginning of the covenanting process, to make them to know, oh, this is the right thing for me, so I want to go ahead. But however, so most of them also highlighted that, well, the website is only helpful at the beginning stage, but if I want to commit further, so I'd rather to talk to the officers. So I just get on the website to find out, so who are the regional officers in my region, so I can call him to discuss the process. Because as I mentioned, it's different from other non-binding voluntary agreements. Covenanting is the permanent. It's your life decision, right? So definitely you need the interpersonal communication process with other people to help you to make a decision what to do. And not only ask about their experience, I also interview them to ask about, so what are the major reasons for you to covenanting, right? So what are the reasons? So do you think the websites really have the content that meet with your like needs or really align with your motivations? And we also ask both landholders and communication officers saying, oh, in the ideal world, so what type of information would be useful to make the websites like practical and to meet with your needs. So then we synthesized the website content analysis, and with both the interviews from officers and landholders, we come up some actionable strategies, right? If you only have limited resources, what sort of information you want to put online? So number one, highlighting not only individual impact, but also the collective impact. As I mentioned, only 3 organizations, so they listed this data saying, this is not scary, right? It's not, you are not only one. Many other people already covenanted. So we call this social norms. Like people, we as human beings, we follow others. we don't want to be the only one. But only 3 organizations communicate this data to landholders. And how we can leveraging loss framing. So like psychologically, so we are more sensitive to loss than gains, right? And according to landholders' motivations, the majority of them, they decide covenanting is to prevent loss. It's not to achieve a gain, but to prevent loss. So not only the loss of the environmental values they care, but more about the loss of the time, investments, the legacy, right? A lot of them already with land for wildlife, land care for 20 years and spend too much efforts in restoring or protecting habitats. They're really worried we're not getting old. So all of this work can be undone in the day. So how we can using loss framing to highlight the protection of the legacy is very important. And also another important motivation is about place attachment, to say, oh, this is special to me. So landholders mention the old growth traits of local wildlife. This region is so special, different from any place else. But also only 4 organizations using that in the website framing. So this can be used more. And how can we showcase relationships with the covenanting organizations? Interesting, only 1 organization is using 1 picture to depicting the officers are helping landholders. The landholders said, oh, I hope to understand that I'm not alone, because I'm not alone. It's so hard, this process. I hope like someone can come here to help me. And also communicate the full spectrum of benefits. I think everybody just put a lot of efforts or wording talking about the financial benefits. But reflecting on the interviews, it's a lot of landholders, they covenant not because of the money, but instead they want to protect the legacy. My hard work is a personal benefit. I want to using covenants as a way to connect with other like-minded landholders or organizations, sort of social benefits. Yeah, so financial benefits alone were not a work, but more sort of how it can combine with other benefits to reflect people's motivation. And importantly, how to make the website useful. Everybody mentioned process. Tell me what to do if I'm interested in covenanting, but what are the steps and what eligibility? So is it 1 hectare, 5 hectares, or 20 hectares? Or, for example, in New South Wales, they have different type of agreements. So which one I can apply for? So there's a lot of like information people cannot find online. And only, as I mentioned, South Australia, they sort of put like small simple steps, but none of other organizations mentioned. So what they should do. And also not important is to how can we tailor communication to make it more accessible to landholders, to tailor to our audience. For example, landholders mentioned, oh, biodiversity is a jargon. I don't feel it's really relevant to me, but instead maybe you can use in the wording like conservation management. And also they don't like to read so academic writing to what is biodiversity, but instead they want to look into more engaging stories, especially from the like-minded others. To say, oh, how about the farmers? So what benefits and what the cost to them? So I want to read more about that so that I can understand whether the programs are suitable for me or not. All right, so these are strategies to enhancing the public-facing communication. But you may ask me, oh, okay, but whatever, those people, they're already interested, right? So they were going to looking for useful information online. But how about others? There are lots of other landholders who may not even aware or who may not interested in covenants at all. So how can we engage this population? Right? So then let's go back to the strategic communication. If we want to design something to appeal to this group, so we will have a very clear purpose now. Okay, we want to engage this group to make them interested in covenanting, at least to get them to interested to look at the website, right? To find covenant could be one option. So who are we targeting? As I mentioned, in Australia, majority of the organizations, we don't have resourcing, we don't have money. So lots of them are taking a more reactive approach to say, I'm waiting for landholders who are already interested and come to my door. So then I can help them to finalize the process. And who are these landholders? So there could be someone already engaged with land for wildlife, the non-binding agreements, or who are already the members of land care, because the research showing that the more conservation management they do, the stronger bonds they can establish with the land. So they are the ones who are more likely to covenanting. Yeah, so for our target audience, we are not looking into, for example, production, the landholders, so who may need incentives, like in New South Wales. So they do tenders to attract these people that give you money, so to make you join the programs. But I think in over this design, we're talking people who are already interested, but how can we make them to commit further? Yeah, from caring for nature to commit to the permanent conservation. And we're very interested in knowing, can we present information in different way to see which messages may be appealing to this group and to make them commit further. And here I need to mention about something very famous framing theory, talking about the same content, but we can craft it different to highlight the different components to make it to appeal to our audience. For example, if you want to sell frozen yogurts, the same thing, right? 20% fat may appeal to people who like the rich flavor, or you want to use 80% fat-free to appeal to the audience who think, oh, this may be healthier, but the same thing. But you can present different well to present different way to appeal to your target audience. So then for the study design, trying to say, can we present the covenant information in different way and see which message may better engage those landholders who are already interested in conservation, but not yet ready for covenanting. And we're going to using the private land conservation organization who these landholders associated with, and to disseminate this information through their regular communication channels. For example, in Southern Queensland, the officers, they just have a newsletter or email list. They can email the information directly to the members. And very important in strategic communication is to evaluate, right? What we are evaluating to say if the message works or not. So in our experiments, we are measuring two indicators. One, the intention. So ask people a sort of questions to measure, so how likely they are going to adopt the covenant in the future. But more importantly, we are also measuring the actual behavior. So we create a link to say, if you want to know more about covenanting, click the link, so we can track if the people, they click the link or not. So this sort of we call it a messaging experiment. It's not really mainstreamed in the conservation world yet. So for example, based on the systematic review, so I think in the past 15 years, so only 27 messaging experiments has been recorded. And many of them, they don't even like testing the message in the real world scenario. So a lot of experiments are setting in, like they testing with university students or like testing like with like the public, the marketing platform, but not with the real audience. And when we're looking at the private land conservation or conservation management, I only found 3 studies, like in the US. So they are testing the different presenting of the messages to attract landholders to, for example, in this one is the enrollment in the soil conservation programs. For example, they got a control message saying, oh, what is soil health? And then compare with the frame message, which highlighted economic benefits or economic plus environment benefits, to say in the experiment condition, so whether people will respond to the message differently. Another study is looking at, can we highlight, for example, peer participation? So you are not alone. Many other farmers already participate in the bird-friendly project, or highlighting the recognition of the motivators to say whether it will change people's willingness to participate in this program. But I want to highlight, so out of very, very limited studies, only 2, so they are sort of promoting the voluntary low-stake behavior, so like join the program, but nobody ever in the world they have tested, so what message may work in the long-term high-stake behavior, for example, signing for the conservation agreements. So I think we are the first one trying to testing, if we can frame the message different way. As I mentioned, so if you want to make a message effective, right, this message needs to highlight the people's existing values or existing motivators. And according to my interviews, the landholders already identified the 3 primary motivations for them to adopt the conservation covenants. So then while testing, so whether the 3 motivations may get the people interest into the covenanting. The first one is legacy protection. So we protect the land because we worry about the loss of our hard work and time. The place attachment, we're covenanting because the very special wildlife or the girth trees, or financial support. I covenant because I want to get access to the technical support and other social benefits. So then we designed this experiment to set a control message. So very standard to say what are covenants. Like saying covenants are legal agreements that ensure long-term protection of natural habitats on private land. And then we set up another 3 groups. So basically is a control message plus the phrase message that highlighting the certain motivators. So basically the design is that when people, they click on the survey, they will be randomly assigned to one of the 4 groups. So we can compare which message can work better and which message can work for what type of landholders. So then we designed this about 10-15 minutes survey and stand out through the land care and then for wildlife networks in Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. And here I'm going to share the results. Instead of collecting the information about the intention and their actual behavior, we also collect other variables to say if some of the demographics, for example, will change landholders' willingness to adopt the covenants. What type of property is a conservation property or is a farm property? And we asked people about land management experiences. Are they already a land for wildlife members or not, for example, and their knowledge about conservation covenants. And also we measured their connectiveness to nature. So using this called the inclusion with nature scale, it's like 2 circles. So one representing you, one representing nature. So they can choose how interconnected these 2 circles are to indicating their connectiveness with the nature. So here are the results. So got a lot of people answered the survey, but only 677, they completed the survey. And among these groups, so 185, they already engaged with covenants. For example, they adopted the covenant or applied for the one, or they purchased the property with the covenants on the title. And then another 492 are the ones who had no experiences with covenants or they were not aware about covenants at all. So they were randomly assigned to the 4 experiment condition to say, so they can only see one message, so we can measure if this message work better or not. And in general, we have a lot of people from Queensland, right? It's not surprising because in Queensland, we have 9 councils, they are offering the covenants, so have more respondents. And this landholders are quite similar. So the mean age around like 61 years old and slightly more female than male. And this group of landholders are highly educated. So 72% of them get at least undergraduate degree, or above. And also majority of them already got a stewardship agreement. For example, they got a land for wildlife agreement in Queensland or Victoria, or they got a wildlife refuge agreement in New South Wales. So these people already engage with conservation in some way, but not yet covenanting. It's exciting. So what are the results? So, the first, before moving to the people who are not yet engaged. So we tested whether the framed message align with the actual motivation for people already engaging, and found the perfect alignment. So asked people, do you agree with the statement that the conservation covenants is a way to help you to prevent loss of your hard work, for example, with the legacy message? So, or do you agree with statements that conservation covenants is an effective tool to protect the old growth traits and native wildlife? And found the perfect alignment. So out of the 7 liked the scale, so most people think the legacy protection and place attachment reflect the actual motivation. So why they decided to covenanting or purchase the property with covenants on the top. And this align with the interviews 100%, I would say. So the financial status is not a major the motivation, but could be important, but less important than legacy protection place attachments. When I saw this result, thinking, okay, so we choose the right message to reflect the right motivation for people for engaging people in covenanting. But do this type of communication work better than others for those people who are not interested or engaged with covenanting? Intention, do they have a higher intention to adopt the covenants? We found out compared with the control group, our message has no difference. So no difference. But instead, we found out, so what make people to be more likely to adopt the covenants is according to the property type. For example, if they got a conservation type, they're more likely to have a higher intention than people has a farm or residential property. Also, if the people have a higher connective needs with nature, they are more likely to adopt the covenants. So there's no overfree the message doesn't perform better than the control message. But how about the actual information thinking? So in general, we got a 30% of people click the link. So at the end of the survey, as I mentioned, we provide a link to see if you want to know more, you click it so we can track if they clicked or not. So overall, okay, 30% that clicked, still there's no difference between the control message and overframed message. But only we found out if people have a higher education or if people from New South Wales, they're more likely to click the link compared with other states. Okay, then another question is that how about people's characteristics? Do some communication work for some landholders? And we only found 1 interactions between legacy message and the enrollment with stewardship agreements or not. For example, if they are land for wildlife members or not. We found out if people who are not engaged with agreements, actually the legacy message lower the intention. But if they are engaged with the agreement, for example, they got land for wildlife or wildlife refuge agreements, so this negative effect was offset, and then they got a slightly higher effect. So how we explain that could be the people who are not the members, so they don't have any experiences really managing the lands, so they don't agree with the legacy message at all. So it's not aligned with their actual experiences. So it's reasons why it's lower the intention. But in general, so we don't see a positive effect compared with the control. So it looks like our messages only worked for people who already engaged with the covenanting, but not with the people who are not engaged at all. So why? But luckily, we collected some qualitative data. So we asked people 2 questions, say, oh, what are your perceptions about conservation covenants? And found out a lot of people, about 378. So they mentioned about the barriers, the reason why they don't covenanting. And we did a thematic analysis, trying to understand the primary views about the conservation covenants. About one third of people, of the total the comments, the views are sort of positive and aligning with the message. For example, saying, oh, covenant's good thing, it's protect over hard work, it's protect nature, and we can using covenants as a way to access funding. And about 40% of 40 comments are sort of neutral. They sort about, well, the conservation covenanting is a long term decision. I need more information that I cannot decide now. Or someone mentioned, well, it's not up to me. I'm already in my retirement and my land is going to be inherited by my children. So it's their decision. So it's written, I cannot say anything. But the majority of the more than 300, I think 80 people, they expressed their concerns. For example, the major themes about distrust in government and the fear of losing autonomy. They worry about the covenanting the way to lose their property rights, or the government's going to control my land, or the government can change the management in any way. So the covenanting will not affect me in the long run. And many of them, about 200, they worry about the future. They think covenants is permanent. So how about the future? So whether it will devalue my land, devalue my receipt value, or I want to keep the mind open, I want to be flexible. So the covenants may be not a decision for now. And all the other people sort of expressed concerns about the practical barriers. For example, 87, they said, oh, maybe I'm not eligible. My land is too small. And I don't really think the covenanting is a way that I can proceed further. Or this process is very costly. And the one landholder mentioned, oh, this will cost me $30,000, but it's not true. So you can find a lot of misperception about that. So I think this qualitative data sort of telling us, even we are talking in the same group, so land for wildlife or land care, like landholders, but there are different segmentation. So when we are communicating, so maybe not only the benefits, if we want to target these groups, maybe we need to bear in mind the barriers in the future and how can we craft the message that sort of addressing their concern could be the next step. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, so all the people using the website, they still think, oh, interpersonal communication is the key. And also from the experiment, we see people's concerns or negative perception covenant. It means we need more investment to develop this trust to address people's concern. So what type of interpersonal communication is my other chapter, that we need to find out the key drivers to underpin this trust. So I did interviews with biodiversity officers and also landholders. And here we found out the communication is not only between the landholders, but it's a long process. So majority of the organizations, they are taking a reactive approach, that landholders come to my door, but only maybe biodiversity conservation trusts, they are using proactive approach to attract landholders, especially in those farming landscapes, to get them into the tender. But once people get into the door, so there's still a long process and landholders can drop out any time. For example, the light green represents the internal process within the organization. Like some officers mentioned, maybe waiting for the minister to sign can take half a year or a year. So by the time landholders circumstances changes, they may be dropping out. And also involving external communication with the landholders. So, but this can also happen. Sometimes landholders mention the barriers to waiting for 2 years, because a long-term waiting period makes them decide to drop out. And it's still in the analysis, but I want to highlight that the interpersonal communication is a relational process, and there are many stakeholders. So not only landholders, but could be the families, Could it be the conservation networks, or could the bank, someone mentioned they want to covenanting, but the bank sort of refused to give them the mortgage. And for the analysis, trying to highlight it, what the stakeholders have an influence in landholders' decision making. Well, so I hopefully to update you the fundings in the near future. But to close, I want to have a summary. So there's a lot of information, but we can see the opportunities so that we can improve our public-facing communication. So we have already the several strategies identified to better communicate the programs to people who are already interested. And then for people who are not interested yet, so we need to taking a more holistic approach. So not only communicate benefits, but maybe in the future we need to craft the message that address people's concerns. And the communication is the process. So maybe not only to identify the right message, but we need to identify the right messaging. So for example, the governments are not trusted by many landholders. So who are the other messages we can rely on? And interpersonal communication is important to formalizing this process. So how we can invest more resources in this organization is key. For example, majority of the organizations, they don't have any money to invest in the communication, or they don't have staff to deliver the agreement with landholders. And what sort of communication we need to have in the future to get the public support into private land conservation is a key question. So I think the Biodiversity Council plays a key role in that. Thank you. Sorry, I think I talked too much. It's running, too much. But let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Shu. Do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Thank you. Any questions?
Terrific. That was really good.
Sorry, too much information, but I can share.
No, it was good. It was really good. Actually, I've got a question. I'm going to start off, which is not about your study, but when you mentioned that bird-friendly maple and the soil health one, I was like, oh, what did they find? And then you didn't say what they found. Did they find what they find sort of align with what you found? Like that, say that economic messaging wasn't significant?
Yeah, so none of the message works as well. The first study they mentioned for the soil health one, they mentioned because the messaging, they assumed the messaging was the Nature Conservancy. They found maybe the Nature Conservancy were not really trusted the messaging, they are too green. So they surprised the effectiveness of the message. And another study, they found out also the message lowered people's intention. The explanation was that because not many people really participate in the project. So if they highlighting the peer participation, it's violate people's real experiences, so they don't trust the message. So then from my experience, it's sort of also showing why the legacy message lower the people's attention in people who don't have agreement. The land for wild agreement could be because they don't invest it much in restoring land. So they sort of violated their actual experiences, so it's a lower intention.
Is it possible that, say, when you look at the people who are not yet part of the program, even though the legacy message didn't appeal to the majority of them, maybe the majority of them were never going to sign up anyway? Yeah. And the types of people who were going to sign up, even if it's only 5%, the legacy message, is there a chance, given of the people who have signed up, the legacy message is so important, is there a chance that it is actually pulling out those people who would actually go through all the way? Yeah, I agree with you. I think the reason why we found the legacy or even place attachment message really work, because it's appeal to people who already decided it's a good thing. I decided. So what do we need to do? Just to streamline the process or tell them what to do. So, but for people who are not yet ready, I think reflected by the qualitative data. So a lot of concerns about distrust, the bureaucratic process. For that, maybe communication need to tailor it to lower the barrier, but not communicate the benefits because they don't trust. So I think in the future, we can do a more sort of segmented analysis to break down those population and to try again. Yeah. And you mentioned early that many of the people managing the websites for the programs mentioned that they don't actually want to make it more appealing.
Yes.
Is there anything from your study that makes you think that if the websites had been better, they would have gotten more people? Or are they just picking up the people who would have, almost no matter how bad their website would have been, they would have come forward anyway?
Yeah, I think to answer your questions, I think for the people for the officers who intended to make the website not attractive, are those like the councils or state governments. So they don't have any communication resources. So the stewardship officers are the ones designing the content. So they want to make the minimum. So they don't want to have more people to apply because they cannot serve them. And according to another questions, I think the main target audience is the existing landholders. So for people already interested, at least if they get on the website, they can find more useful information to reinforce covenanting to make it happen. Because if you don't have a useful website for people who are already interested, they think, oh, I don't think I'm eligible. Like I interviewed landholder said at the first time, then, oh, when I look at the website, I don't think I'm eligible. So I didn't do. Until I spoke to officer, and my officer told me, oh, I have perfect habitat. So sort of how you using this information to help the people who are already highly interested, but make them to think there's something doable and I can do in a good way. But it's not a marketing tool.
It's like to get your warm leads over the line.
Yeah.
Did Michael, I can see your faces. Do you have any questions?
2 MCs, that's a bit rad.
Mike.
You go first, Michael.
Oh, okay then. All right, thanks, Michael. Yeah, Shu, that was awesome, and obviously it just sort of reflects the conversations that we've had now for some time. It really seems to me that the gist of good communication is using storytelling, particularly from those who are already engaged, and particularly in relation to the 3 things you mentioned: legacy protection, place attachment, and financial support. And that's the thing for people such as myself. With limited resources, we kind of have to focus on delivering the best service we can to the people who are already engaged, but we still have to find a mechanism for trying to get those who are not engaged over the line. So it's a real balancing act. But subsequent to your and my ongoing conversations, I'm actually going through a process right now of modernising, is probably the best way of putting it, our website content to reflect, not what council would say are the benefits of engaging in private land conservation, but what the landholders. So then it's not council, because councils are often, people don't necessarily have a high regard for them. We're very, we seem to be very bureaucratic. We're the people that levy rates after all. And to use landholders' stories and testimonials to do that sort of work for us. So I guess that seems to be the emerging way that scientists, of which I'm one, communicate better with both their existing audience and the audience that they're trying to attract. That would appear to be one of your key messages?
Yeah, and to reflect on what you said, Michael, I think the most important thing, as I mentioned, strategic communication. So what is the purpose or the aim? As the organization perspectives, you have limited resourcing. Are you going to invest more to serve existing landholders, to formalizing the covenanting process, to make them to align the management after even of the covenants? Or we want to invest more resources to get people in the door? So it's like 2 different purposes. But I think in general, what I found is that private land conservation organizations are short for resourcing. I think for biodiversity councils, your survey also found out. So there's not a lot of funding into this realm to support of officers. So how can we using communication, not only the landholders, but how are we using the communication to get a public sort of policy support to allocate more resourcing in private land conservation? I think it's a key question.
Yep. And interestingly, it's a catch-22, because even though, we've got hundreds of landholders who are interested in land for wildlife, it's really difficult getting, for example, stories from them about the great things they're doing into our newsletter so that we can promote, the great things happening out there. It's kind of like people are very reluctant to, be filmed or to provide testimonials, because they don't kind of, I guess, want to blow their own trumpet, but that's the very thing that we need to get better at getting from them and showing an ongoing partnership. But it's really challenging, which I find quite ironic in a way.
Mm.
But thanks, it was a fantastic presentation. Thank you. It was really good.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody else who's come and is still on the line. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Please keep in touch.
Thanks, guys. That was awesome. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.